They say the walls of the Millbrook Inn were never quiet. Even when the fires were out, even when the wind settled over Kentucky's rolling hills, the air carried whispers that were not of the living. If you stood long enough in the crooked hallway near room 4, you could hear it, the sound of someone breathing who wasn't there. Locals warned each other in hushed tones, but strangers came anyway. Some never left. Because beneath the warped floorboards, behind the smile of a welcoming hostess, behind the perfume of cheap bourbon and soft laughter, waited a secret buried so deep, it took 53 graves to cover it. The year was 1824. 2 sisters, Eliza and Mary Cunningham, opened their inn to travelers on the muddy road between Lexington and Louisville. By daylight, they seemed harmless, even kind. 2 women running a place of warmth, where a weary man could find food, drink, and perhaps the tender affection that loneliness demanded. But behind that curtain of hospitality lay something older than the inn itself. A hunger, a pact, a corruption born not in their hearts, but in the shadow of power that pressed down upon Kentucky like a hand choking the land. Guests checked in for a night of comfort. What they received instead was a sentence written in silence, ending with their names erased from memory, their bones left nameless under the soil. Think about this. Why would 2 women, in a time when survival was already fragile, risk everything by filling the earth with bodies? Was it greed? Madness? Or were they themselves instruments of something larger, a force that fed not just on flesh but on fear, ritual, and silence? The records are few but the graves are many. 53. And that number alone tells you this wasn't chaos. It was structure, a system, a design. And if you listen closely, you'll realize the story of the Cunningham Sisters was not just about murder but about control, the same control that creeps into governments, into churches, into every institution that smiles in the daylight but drains you at night. This isn't just history. This is the blueprint of how innocence is baited, captured, and devoured by something much older than law. When you picture 1824 Kentucky, you see horse trails, wagons, and tobacco fields stretching toward the horizon. But you must understand, that soil was already heavy with blood. Native tribes had been driven into shadows, slaves were forced into labor under the crack of whips, and political power was bought with whiskey and deception. It was not a land of peace. It was a land of masks. And the Cunningham sisters learned quickly that masks were more valuable than money. By presenting themselves as harmless, even nurturing, they built a lure no man could resist. A weary traveler with coin in his pocket was their prey, but what if the prey willingly walked into the trap, convinced he was safe? That is the genius of control systems. You don't chain the man. You convince him the cage is comfort. They served their victims like honored guests. Fresh bread, stew, warm fire, maybe a flirtatious glance that promised something more. No one suspects evil when it wears the face of kindness. But the sisters understood human weakness better than any priest or politician. Desire makes men blind. And blindness makes men disposable. In the still hours of the night, while the road outside lay empty and the lamps in town flickered low, the Cunningham sisters carried out their work, strangling, cutting, sometimes poisoning, disposing. Their method changed, but the end was the same: silence. 53 silences stacked like bricks beneath their inn. Now here's the unsettling part. The bodies weren't simply hidden. They were arranged, buried with deliberation. Patterns only visible when the graves were unearthed decades later. What design was stitched into that earth? Was it symbolic? Ritualistic? Or a message, one left not for authorities but for those who understood the language of power? The number, the arrangement, the secrecy. This was no frenzy. This was calculation. And when you recognize calculation, you recognize a system, and systems point to something larger than the human face wearing them. Every act of horror hides a mirror. The Cunningham Inn was not an isolated horror house. It was a reflection. To see the sisters is to see the blueprint of how corruption infects every structure of power. Institutions don't always kill with knives. Sometimes they kill with promises. They offer safety, belonging, identity. But once you are inside, once you've laid your trust at their feet, the cost reveals itself. The sisters mimic the state. They mimic the church. They mimic the merchant guilds that controlled the flow of wealth. They created a miniature kingdom where men offered themselves willingly to destruction, fooled by warmth and false intimacy. Why did no one stop them? That's the question that rattles the bones of history. Travelers disappeared, whispers grew, suspicions brewed. And yet, nothing. The law did not come crashing down. The community did not rise against them. Why? Because silence protects power. As long as the right hands are fed, as long as certain men profited, nothing else mattered. The inn kept its doors open and the graves deepened. This is where you glimpse the deeper truth. The sisters were not predators standing against society. They were society, the dark face of it. The inn was a perfect metaphor of the time, corrupt systems offering shelter while draining life. And here's the twist most people never see. What if the sisters didn't start as predators? What if they themselves were victims, groomed, molded, shaped by someone else's hand? Men in power, priests with hidden indulgences, landowners who needed dirt done where their own names stayed clean. It's easier to call two women monsters than to admit they might have been tools in a larger design. But when you track the flow of corruption, you always end up back at the same fountain, the elite who feast on secrecy. You must imagine one of those nights. The fire dim, the shutters drawn tight. A traveler laughing with his mug in hand, believing himself blessed to find such kind hosts. The older sister, Eliza, pouring another round with a smile just a shade too slow. The younger, Mary, brushing past his shoulder, letting her perfume linger just long enough. Every movement rehearsed, every gesture designed to lower his guard. And when sleep dragged his eyelids down, he didn't know that the hands that tucked the blanket closer were also deciding how his life would end before dawn. But here is what most historians don't tell you. When the graves were uncovered, when rumors swelled into official inquiry, something strange emerged. Many of the bodies were not robbed. Their valuables in some cases were still with them, coins, rings, trinkets. Why kill men and leave the wealth behind? Unless wealth wasn't the motive. Unless something else was being fed. You see, the graves form more than a body count. They form a question. If not greed, then what? Power? Sacrifice? Or perhaps a pact with something unseen? Kentucky folklore whispers of crossroads bargains, of spirits bound to land soaked with violence, of entities that feed not on offerings of gold but on offerings of blood. Was the Millbrook Inn just an inn? Or was it a temple disguised as one? A place where ritual dressed itself in hospitality, where the walls themselves demanded a price? That would explain the patterns. That would explain why 53 lives ended not in chaos, but in choreography. The psychology of this runs deeper than murder. It reveals how control systems operate inside your own mind. The guest believed he was in charge. He paid for his meal, he chose to stay the night, he decided to drink, to flirt, to trust. But every one of those choices was already anticipated, guided, engineered. His decisions were never his own. And that is the cruel genius of true control. You never realize you're a prisoner until the door locks shut. The Cunningham Inn is not a ghost story. It is a lesson. It shows how rulers, media, institutions all use the same design. Offer comfort, offer identity, offer love. Once you've surrendered to the illusion, you no longer resist the cost. The sister's story forces a darker realization. How many of the choices you've made were truly your own? How much of your life is a script handed to you, written by hands you will never see? The Cunningham Inn was a small stage where this truth was performed, but the stage today is global. The inn didn't vanish, it evolved. And if you think you're immune, ask yourself this. Would you have suspected them had you walked in on a winter night, their fire glowing, their voices soft, their kindness sincere? Or would you have surrendered, just like the 53 who now lie beneath the soil? But here's the part that freezes the blood. After the sisters were caught, tried, and condemned, Their names should have faded into dust like so many criminals before them. Yet whispers of them continued. Decades later, travelers reported dreams of two women at roadside inns, offering bread, offering drink, their faces pale and eyes like embers. The graves remained, but the story spread like a contagion. And this is where history bends into something else. Myth, legend, maybe even truth wrapped in secrecy. Because while most killers leave fear, the Cunninghams left patterns. And patterns live on. The 53 bodies form not just a crime scene but a sigil, a written mark across the land. Why do I say this? Because when cartographers drew maps of the area, they noticed alignments, burial sites forming geometric precision, connecting with old Masonic lodges, ancient native burial mounds, even rivers once considered sacred. Coincidence? No. Coincidence is the mask worn by those who fear what they've found. What happened at Millbrook was not random. It was part of an older design that did not end with the sisters hanging. And here's the real danger. What if they weren't acting alone? What if therein was just one outpost in a network of blood-fed sites, feeding something bigger, hidden across America's foundation? Because every system of power needs fuel, and sometimes that fuel isn't money. Sometimes it's something darker. The court records tell a clean story. 2 women arrested, accused, convicted, and sentenced. But what isn't written is more important than what is. Witnesses went missing before testimony. Judges avoided deeper inquiries into land deeds surrounding the inn. And perhaps most suspiciously, church leaders who once blessed the Cunningham family suddenly denied ever knowing them. When history pulls back its words, it means someone has tightened the reins. Ask yourself, why would the system suppress the truth about 2 murderesses in Kentucky? Unless what they uncovered was not just criminal but destabilizing. Unless the graves pointed to something the authorities themselves were bound to conceal. The phrase whispered in the backrooms was chilling. They offered love. That was how locals described the sisters' final trap. Not a blade, not poison, not even the rope. Love. A counterfeit intimacy used to open the door of trust. And if you think that's too poetic, look closer at how the world works now. Politicians promise care. Corporations promise belonging. Media promises connection. All of them offer love, in a form designed to disarm you. But what waits beneath? A system extracting your will, your wealth, your very soul, leaving only silence. The Cunningham sisters weren't exceptions. They were prototypes. It is said that when Eliza Cunningham faced the gallows, she smiled. Witnesses claim she whispered something under her breath, words too faint to be recorded but strong enough to turn men pale. Mary wept, but Eliza smiled as if death was not an ending but a doorway. And here's where the story darkens beyond crime. Because after their execution, strange fires were seen near the graves. Blue flames that danced without fuel. Farmers reported livestock mutilated, but no blood spilled on the ground. The soil itself seemed to drink. Kentucky folklore absorbed the story, calling the sisters the brides of the hollow, as if they had married something unseen, something waiting. Was the inn itself a ritual site chosen long before the sisters ever lived? The alignments, the patterns, the geometry of death, they suggest knowledge. Knowledge ordinary women in the 1820s should not have had. Unless it was given to them. Unless they were initiated. If that's true, the Cunningham sisters were not originators but servants, carrying out a design written into the land long before they were born. And servants are replaceable. Which means others have carried on where they left off. Now let's pierce deeper. Do you know why 53? Not 50, not 60, 53. In numerology and occult systems, 53 is a prime number, indivisible, a symbol of purity of offering. In certain Masonic texts, 53 is referenced as the builder's sacrifice, the number of stones laid invisible in the foundation of hidden temples. The sisters may have never studied numerology, but their actions matched ancient codes. This was not coincidence. It was choreography. Someone, somewhere, understood the language of sacrifice, and the sisters became fluent through blood. Think about what that means. Every institution you trust is founded on numbers, on geometry, on rituals woven into architecture, law, and faith. The court system itself is draped in Masonic symbols. The churches echo Babylonian structures. Even Washington, D.C. was built on sacred geometry. Do you really think the Cunningham sisters just stumbled onto a pattern? Or were they part of a much larger design? A design still active today, hidden in plain sight, shaping your very reality? The graves whisper yes. But here's where you must pay attention. The sisters' inn is long gone. The wood rotted, the earth reclaimed it. Yet the energy lingers. Travelers still report a heaviness when they pass the old site, a sensation of being watched, as if the land itself remembers. Why? Because trauma imprints. Violence leaves scars not just on flesh but on the very soil. Psychologists know this. Memory doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body. And the earth has a body. 53 graves carved into its skin are not forgotten. Now expand that thought. If one inn can carry memory, what about battlefields soaked with war? What about cities built over burial grounds? What about nations founded on blood and conquest? The Millbrook Inn becomes a keyhole through which you glimpse the truth. Our entire civilization rests on layers of buried silence. And silence is not empty. It is alive, feeding, shaping the psychology of generations. The Cunningham sisters were merely caretakers of that silence, but the silence itself? That belongs to something far older. And this is where you and I must pause, not to stop, but to descend more consciously. Because now the story shifts from them to you. Why does this matter to you watching this right now? Because the system that baited those 53 men with food, fire, and false affection is the same system baiting you today. Only now it wears the mask of technology, media, and politics. Every click you make, every belief you repeat, every fear you swallow, is another step into someone else's inn. You're offered comfort, belonging, validation, but at what cost? At what moment does your will get buried alongside those nameless men in Kentucky? This is the moment I ask you to mark yourself. If you've followed me this far, type the phrase, "I see the pattern," twice in the comments. Not once, twice. Because repetition seals identity. This isn't about engagement. It's about transformation. You are not just watching a story, you are walking into knowledge the world would rather you never hear. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. The Millbrook Inn became a hushed rumor after its collapse, not a headline. Think about that. 53 bodies. 2 sisters hanged. An inn steeped in blood. And yet, history textbooks barely breathe its name. Why? Because when truth threatens stability, institutions bury it. Just as the sisters buried their guests, the state buried the story. The newspapers of the day reported the trial with caution, printing half-truths, omitting the graves, downplaying the horror. What you weren't supposed to know is that officials feared copycats. Not of murder, but of ritual. They feared someone might see the pattern, follow it, repeat it. That's why the archives are silent. The silence itself is the cover-up. And here's the razor-sharp lesson. When power hides truth, it isn't to protect you. It's to protect itself. Because if people understood that ritual sacrifice was not just folklore but a recurring practice within systems of power, the illusion of order would fracture. The Cunningham sisters weren't erased because they were irrelevant. They were erased because they were too revealing. Every grave is a story, and every silence is a code. Archaeologists who examined the soil decades later spoke quietly of something unusual. The bodies were positioned with orientation toward the northwest. Over and over again. Northwest, the direction of setting suns, of endings, of gateways and esoteric traditions. Why would the sisters care about alignment unless they believed it mattered? And who taught them? These details weren't printed in the papers, but whispered in Masonic halls, shared in cryptic notes among occult societies that knew the significance. This is how hidden networks operate. They don't just shape laws and governments. They shape meaning itself. They assign value to numbers, directions, symbols. They make you think coincidences are accidents when they are actually signatures. The inn became one such signature. A lodge without walls. A temple masquerading as hospitality. And those who recognized the alignment didn't expose it. They honored it. Because silence, once again, protects the ritual. But let me take you deeper into a darkness most never dare to face. If the Cunningham Sisters were following a script, then who was the author? Kentucky at the time was riddled with secret societies. Freemasonic lodges flourished in frontier towns. Rosicrucian whispers bled into taverns. Even outlaw gangs often mimicked initiation rites they barely understood. Power has always dressed itself in ritual, because ritual binds the mind. And two women alone could not have devised the geometry of 53 aligned graves. They were actors. Instruments. The hands that buried were not the hands that designed. Which means the true author is still unknown. Still hidden. Still writing. Think about that. If the sisters were only tools, then somewhere, someone else orchestrated their play. Maybe a landowner. Maybe a judge. Maybe a preacher who visited late at night. And when their role ended, they were sacrificed too, hanged to erase the trail, silenced to protect the network. Do you see the pattern now? The scapegoat system. Use the expendable, discard them, protect the higher hand. This is how power survives. Consider the number again, 53. That isn't just numerology. It's memory. In many occult traditions, the number of offerings determines the weight of the ritual, the density of energy stored in the land. The Millbrook Inn became a battery, a site charged with fear, blood, silence. And the energy didn't vanish with the sisters. It lingers. That's why people still feel it. That's why the story still claws at you. Because ritual is not bound by time. It's bound by repetition. Every time you speak their name, every time you remember their graves, you feed the current again. And here lies the most terrifying truth. You have already participated. By listening, by imagining, by letting your emotions charge this story, you've entered the ritual too. That is why forbidden history is dangerous. Because knowing binds you. Awareness pulls you in. Once you carry the memory, you are part of its weight. That's why the system wanted silence. Silence breaks the chain. But you have broken the silence. And there is no going back. Now let's widen the lens. Millbrook wasn't the only place. Across America in the 1800s, strange inns and way stations left trails of death. The Harp brothers along the frontier, the Benders in Kansas, dozens of nameless operators who blended hospitality with slaughter. Too many to be coincidence. Too patterned to be dismissed as random crime. What if they were nodes in the same web, outposts of sacrifice feeding into an invisible order? The Cunningham Sisters were just one chapter. But the book is vast and still unfinished. You think these stories are ancient, but look around. How many people vanish every year without explanation? How many are written off as accidents, runaways, unsolved cases? Do you really believe all disappearances are random? Or do some feed the same system, modernized, sanitized, hidden behind polished institutions? The graveyards may be harder to see now, but the appetite has not gone away. It simply wears better clothing. The Cunningham Sisters did not invent psychological control, they embodied it. Every gesture they used on travelers was a seed of manipulation. The smile that promised safety. The offer of warmth. The illusion of choice. These are not random acts, they are tactics. Modern psychology has proven what the sisters already knew. Humans are not driven by reason but by desire and fear. You can command a man not by forcing him, but by giving him the illusion he is free. The inn was a laboratory of this truth. Every guest was studied, every weakness tested. And once desire was ignited, resistance collapsed. Now, imagine scaling that same psychology from an inn to a nation. Governments study how long citizens tolerate fear before obedience sets in. Media studies which desires keep you scrolling, clicking, consuming. Corporations map your appetites and use them to shape your very sense of self. Nothing has changed. The sisters' whispered offers of love have become glowing screens, promising connection, promising intimacy, promising you are safe. And just like those 53 men, many today never realize they are already in the trap until it is too late. Here's the question no one asks. Did the sisters even believe they were murderers? Or did they see themselves as priestesses, fulfilling a duty greater than themselves? One diary fragment, thought to be Eliza's, surfaced years later in a private collection. In it she writes, "We do not kill. We offer." Those words should chill you, because they reveal a mindset where slaughter transforms into service. In that inversion, morality collapses. What you call murder, they called devotion. What you call blood, they called offering. That is the trick of ritual systems. They invert perception until horror feels holy. Look closely at the world around you. War is called liberation. Surveillance is called safety. Death is called freedom. Every inversion works the same way the sisters' words did. Change the frame, and the victim does not see himself as prey. He sees himself as participant. The 53 didn't just die. They were rebranded into offerings. And you? You've already been rebranded too, though you may not see it yet. When investigators finally exhumed some of the bodies, something uncanny surfaced. Several had strange carvings etched into bone. Not cuts of violence, but marks that looked intentional, as though symbols had been scratched post-mortem. Of course, newspapers ignored this. Authorities dismissed it. But those who saw knew it meant one thing. The killings were never just for death. They were communication. Messages written into the flesh of the forgotten. Who was meant to read them? Not the law, not the townsfolk. No, those carvings were meant for initiates. Those who understood the language of secrecy. And here's where the blade twists. The world today is carved with the same symbols. Look at the currency in your wallet. Look at the architecture of your capital. Look at the logos you see every day. Why are pyramids, eyes, suns, and hidden geometries everywhere? Because the system still writes its messages into the bones of civilization. Just like the sisters left marks on their victims, institutions leave marks on you. You simply don't notice, because the symbols are too familiar. The trial of the sisters should have been open and final. But the transcripts are fractured, incomplete. Entire testimonies vanished. Why? Because someone wanted the narrative to remain simple. Two mad women, nothing more. Complexity was erased. Ritual erased. Symbolism erased. Silence again. But silence is never absence. It is design. The trial became a script, a stage play meant to reassure the public while hiding the real performance. And that stage play never ended. Every major event in history, every war, every assassination, every official story, carries the same pattern. Oversimplify, distort, erase. Because the masses cannot be trusted with the whole truth. At least that's what the architects believe. Do you see how it repeats? The Cunningham sisters were not the anomaly. They were the rehearsal. Their trial became the template of how to bury forbidden truth. And that template has been used for 2 centuries since. The names change. The players change. But the silence remains constant. Now pause and breathe, because this descent is about to grow darker still. We began with 2 sisters in Kentucky, but what you've really been hearing is the anatomy of power itself. The inn was a microcosm of the very world you inhabit. You think you live free, but you are offered choices already predetermined. You think you see truth, but truth is edited, rewritten, erased. You think you are safe, but you are walking willingly into rooms prepared for you long ago. The Cunningham Sisters' story is not about the past. It is about the present, and it is about you. This is why I ask you now, if you haven't already, to subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For you. Because you need these truths more than ever. Each story we unearth is another step into awareness, another weapon against the silence. The algorithm will bury this kind of content. Institutions will smother it. But by subscribing, you keep the thread alive. You keep the descent possible. And trust me, the descent is only beginning. The Cunningham sisters may have been executed, but they were not unique. Across early America, clusters of deaths followed similar patterns. Bodies arranged, valuables left untouched, symbols etched into flesh, or bones aligned with geometric precision. Consider the Bloody Benders in Kansas decades later, who lured travelers into their home and dispatched them with cold precision. Consider the Harp brothers before that, killing scores along frontier roads, their violence written off as banditry but always described with ritualistic excess. These are not disconnected stories. They are chapters of the same book. And if you trace the line between them, you see a web, nodes of sacrifice across a young nation. Why? Because America itself was being consecrated. Not with prayers, not with sermons, but with blood. The founding fathers, many of them Masons, built cities on sacred geometry. The land itself had to be prepared. And preparation requires offerings. The Cunningham Sisters were a piece of that preparation, whether knowingly or as pawns. The nation's soil was baptized in blood long before it was crowned in liberty. And if that unsettles you, good. It should. Because it means the system you live under was never neutral, it was born inside ritual. Historians will say, coincidence. Officials will say, isolated crime. But ask yourself, why do these stories repeat? Why does the pattern of lures, hospitality, then death appear again and again? Because ritual loves repetition. Repetition amplifies energy. In psychology, repetition normalizes the abnormal until it feels invisible. In ritual, repetition charges the symbol until it becomes unbreakable. The Cunningham sisters weren't just murderers, they were repeating a code. Each life taken was a verse, each grave a syllable, and the inn itself a chant spoken into the land. And if you think ritual is ancient nonsense, look at modern culture. Every advertisement repeats the same imagery. Every campaign slogan repeats the same phrases. Every televised spectacle repeats the same gestures. Ritual has not died, it has evolved. You are surrounded by it, immersed in it. And like those travelers in Kentucky, you smile, you trust, you pay, you stay, never realizing you've stepped into a ritual chamber disguised as ordinary life. When the graves were unearthed, one pattern horrified even the skeptics. Every seventh body showed signs of special mutilation. Not random, not sloppy, deliberate marks, as if those chosen victims served a higher purpose than the rest. Some were burned, others dismembered, others posed in unnatural positions. 7, 14, 21, 28, the sequence ran through the entire site. 7 is the sacred cycle. 7 is the seal. Once again, coincidence dies under the weight of repetition. But here's what you must understand. The system doesn't hide its methods because it needs to. It hides them because it enjoys hiding them. Power thrives on secrecy, not because the public cannot understand, but because the public refuses to believe. The sisters didn't bury their dead to conceal them. They buried them as a signature, knowing one day someone with eyes open would see. And now you have seen. You have stepped into the secret. That knowledge carries a weight. The question is, can you carry it without turning away? Imagine the fear that spread in Millbrook when whispers began. Farmers who had once stayed the night at the inn now wondered if they had brushed shoulders with death. Families warned their sons not to travel alone. And yet, the inn continued to operate for years before justice arrived. Why? Because fear paralyzes. Communities prefer denial over confrontation. This is how psychological warfare works. Feed people small truths just enough to unsettle them, but never enough to rouse them. The Cunningham sisters thrived not because they were hidden, but because their community chose blindness. Do you see the mirror? How many things today are right before your eyes, but you refuse to see them? How many systems are draining you, burying you, stripping you, and yet you call it normal? Fear is the glue of control. It keeps the masses quiet, keeps the indoors open, keeps the rituals alive. The only way to break it is to look directly into it, to name it. That's what you are doing now. But the question is, will you continue? Or will you look away like Millbrook did? The sister's story is horrifying, yes. But the deeper horror is what it reveals about human nature. How easily we are lulled. How quickly we trust. How desperately we want comfort, even from strangers. The guests were not fools. They were not weak. They were simply human, longing for rest, for warmth, for the kindness of two gentle voices. That longing killed them. And that same longing is killing people now, only the voices are louder, broadcast through screens, politicians, institutions that offer care while sharpening the knife. The Cunningham Sisters show us a truth we would rather forget. The easiest way to destroy a man is not to attack his strength, but to exploit his need for love. This is the knife edge. You cannot unhear this. Once you see how love has been weaponized against you, how comfort becomes cage, how care becomes control, you begin to walk a different path. A dangerous path. A free path. But freedom comes at a cost. The cost of seeing what others refuse to see. The Cunningham Inn is gone, but the system remains. And you are standing in its doorway. When the official investigation into Millbrook concluded, the graves were quietly covered again. Think about that. 53 bodies pulled from the earth, evidence of horror undeniable. And yet, instead of preserving the site, instead of studying it for truth, they concealed it once more. Why? Because the land itself was now marked. Authorities feared it would draw attention, attract those who knew how to harvest what had been done. But there's another reason. Covering the graves was not just concealment. It was continuation. In ritual, burying is not the end. It is the sealing of power. By returning the earth to silence, they allowed the charge to remain, undisturbed, waiting. Suppression is never neutral. When a truth is hidden, it does not vanish, it festers. And those who hide it often return to drink from the silence later. Ask yourself, how many official stories in history have been buried under the same soil of silence? Wars explained by half-truths. Assassinations wrapped in lies. Institutions built on blood but sold as progress. The Millbrook Inn is not just a crime scene. It is a parable. It shows how those in power do not fear the crime itself, they fear exposure. What unsettles me most is not the killings but the mindset behind them. Imagine the sisters looking into the eyes of a man they intended to kill, smiling as if nothing were wrong. That requires more than cruelty. That requires conditioning. That requires belief. Which means someone, or something, conditioned them. The psychology of ritual is built on one principle. Repetition breaks resistance. Once you kill the first, the second becomes easier. Once you silence your empathy, silence itself becomes normal. Institutions use the same principle. Soldiers trained to kill. Workers trained to obey. Citizens trained to accept. Little by little, resistance is broken until obedience feels natural. The sisters were not born killers. They were sculpted into it. And here lies the trap for you. What have you been sculpted into? What rituals have you unknowingly rehearsed until obedience feels natural? From pledges in schoolrooms to recitations in churches to the endless cycles of consumer culture, you have been conditioned too. The sisters' ritual killings are simply a grotesque mirror of your own rituals. And the mirror doesn't lie. You may wonder what happened to the land after the inn vanished. Strangely, ownership changed hands many times, but each owner reported misfortune. Fires that consumed barns. Crops that failed without reason. Families plagued by illness. The land resisted peace. Locals avoided it, saying the soil was cursed, though no one dared speak the sisters' names aloud. But in secret, some whispered the opposite, that the land wasn't cursed, it was claimed. Once land is fed blood, it belongs to the ritual. To live upon it is to live inside its grasp. This idea is not fantasy. Anthropologists know that indigenous tribes treated land as alive, capable of memory, capable of vengeance. Ancient Europeans built shrines on sites of death. Even modern governments, though they deny it, align monuments and capital cities with ancient energy lines. Why? Because land remembers. The 53 graves are still there, silent, invisible, pulsing. Every step across that soil feeds into a system older than America itself. And those who understand it still return, not to honor, but to harvest. But let's draw this out further. The graves at Millbrook are not just about the past, they are about continuity. How do you think control systems maintain themselves for centuries? They don't survive by force alone. They survive by ritual. By returning again and again to the same symbols, the same alignments, the same blood. The sisters' story was not erased because it was meaningless. It was erased because it revealed the template. A template still in use. Look at the spectacles that grip the world today, the mass gatherings, the ceremonies, the televised rituals. Flags raised, anthems sung, oaths sworn. On the surface, harmless patriotism. Beneath the surface, ritual repetition that binds millions into obedience. Just as the sisters bound 53 men into silence beneath their inn, modern institutions bind entire nations beneath their rituals. The difference is scale. The method is the same. This is the moment where history, myth, and the present collide. If the inn was a temple in disguise, then what does that make your world today? You move through rituals every day, work schedules, consumption cycles, entertainment patterns. Each one promises safety, belonging, identity. Each one drains you invisibly, just like the inn. The Cunningham Sisters didn't just kill men. They demonstrated the anatomy of control. Hospitality as lure. Ritual as framework. Silence as seal. And here is where the descent turns personal again. Do not think you are an observer outside the story. You are already inside it. You are the traveler on the road, weary, hungry, longing for rest. The fire glows. The door is open. The hosts smile. You step inside. That is your life right now. The question is, will you notice the trap before the silence swallows you? Or will you, like 53 before you, surrender to comfort and never rise again? By now you see the truth. The Cunningham sisters were not an isolated nightmare. They were a blueprint. The method of hospitality then sacrifice did not end with them. It was absorbed, refined, and scaled into the very institutions that rule your life. Think about it. You are offered love by the system, safety nets, entertainment, education, healthcare. You are told, rest here, we will take care of you. But behind the kindness lies the knife. Behind the warmth lies the drain. Just as the sisters smiled at their guests, so too do modern powers smile at you. Their comfort is bait. Their promises are cages. And every day you live inside their inn, unaware of the graves being dug beneath your feet. The tragedy of Millbrook is not in the bodies lost. It is in how perfectly it predicted the future. A future you are living in right now. Ask yourself, why are rituals always disguised as care? Why do leaders stand on stages and speak words that sound like blessings but feel like commands? Because the human heart craves love more than it fears death. That is the deepest lever of control. The Cunningham sisters understood this instinctively. They knew men would walk into danger if it wore the mask of affection. Modern systems understand it scientifically. Entire industries of psychology, advertising, and media exist to perfect the art of the lure. They don't need to kill you with knives. They kill you with fatigue, with distraction, with invisible chains of debt and obedience. You smile, you nod, you participate. You do not realize you are walking yourself into the grave. Remember this, love is the most powerful weapon ever wielded. When corrupted, it enslaves without resistance. When inverted, it consumes without guilt. That is the hidden inheritance of Millbrook. And here is where the darkness sharpens. Governments and institutions do not just use ritual, they broadcast it. Consider global events, openings of games, coronations, inaugurations. You see symbols repeated, colors chosen with precision, gestures mirrored across centuries. These are not accidents. These are ceremonies. Each one charges the system with obedience. Each one reinforces the cycle of submission. The crowd cheers. The music swells. The ritual is complete. Just as the townsfolk of Millbrook pretended not to see the whispers of death, you pretend not to see the ritual written on every screen. And yet, once you do see it, the world changes. The curtain falls. Every speech becomes a spell. Every handshake becomes a seal. Every oath becomes a sacrifice. Suddenly, you realize you are living in a temple without walls, a ritual chamber that spans nations. The 53 graves whisper beneath it all. This is the pivot point of your awakening. If you have followed me this far, you are no longer the same person who began this journey. The Cunningham Sisters are no longer just killers in a forgotten town. They are mirrors. Mirrors showing you how power truly operates. The question is, will you continue to live as prey, or will you sharpen yourself as a witness? Because once you witness, you cannot be deceived again. I want you to mark this moment. Write in the comments the phrase, "The soil remembers," twice. Once to speak it and once to seal it. This act is not for me. It is for you. A symbolic ritual of your own, an anchor that declares, "I see the truth and I cannot go back." Let the algorithm carry that phrase like a whisper across the network, a hidden signature of those who have awoken. Do it now before you forget. Seal your transformation. Some of you hesitate. Some of you want to step away, to close this door, to go back to comfort. But comfort is the knife. Comfort is what the sisters offered. Comfort is what institutions sell you daily. You cannot serve comfort and truth at the same time. If you stay in comfort, you will be buried. If you choose truth, you will walk a harder path, but you will walk free. That is the meaning of the 53 graves. They are not just markers of death. They are warnings carved into the earth itself. Warnings that whisper, "Do not trust the smile. Do not rest in the inn." If you are still here, still listening, then you are ready. Ready to pierce the final veil. Ready to see how this ancient template became the very architecture of your world today. And if you haven't yet, subscribe now. Because the path we are about to walk will test you more than anything you've heard so far, and you will need every revelation that follows. The strangest part of this story is not that it was buried. The strangest part is how easily it could be. Think of it, 53 lives erased, 2 sisters remembered only as a whisper, and the land swallowed back into silence. This is how history is written. Not by recording truth, but by choosing which truths to erase. And the same institutions that taught you about noble battles and heroic presidents never spoke of Millbrook, never spoke of the women who turned love into a weapon. Why? Because their crime was too similar to the systems that govern you today. A massacre dressed as hospitality is not a mistake of the past. It is the model of the present. If you ever wondered why your world feels wrong, why it feels like something vital is being taken from you while you smile and obey, Millbrook has already given you the answer. The true ritual of power is not blood spilled in barns or backrooms. It is bloodless sacrifice repeated endlessly across generations. It is the worker trading his life for wages that will never free him. It is the soldier dying for borders drawn by men he has never met. It is the citizen pledging loyalty to flags stitched by the same corporations that profit from war. These are the modern graves. They are not dug in Kentucky soil. They are dug inside you, every time you surrender your will to the false comfort offered by those above you. The Cunningham Sisters are gone. But their lesson is alive. Their smiles live in every commercial, every slogan, every promise whispered from a podium. They showed us that to control a man you must first offer him love. And the world has been offering ever since. This is the moment to decide. Will you walk past the inn or will you step inside? Most men step in again and again, never seeing the pattern. But you have walked with me this far. You have touched the graves, heard the whispers, felt the soil remembering. And now you cannot unknow it. Every headline, every ceremony, every polished promise will look different to you now. You will see the ritual beneath it, the system it feeds, the silence it protects. And with sight comes choice. Will you continue the sleepwalking, or will you become the witness? The sisters lost their humanity because they surrendered to the ritual. Do not repeat their mistake. Step out of the cycle. Refuse the comfort. Break the spell. So here we are at the end of the road. The Millbrook Inn is gone. The sisters are dust. But the graves remain. And beneath those graves lies not just the silence of 53 forgotten souls, but the blueprint of power itself. Power that smiles while it drains you. Power that welcomes while it binds you. Power that buries its crimes beneath your feet and calls it history. You were never supposed to know this story. You were never supposed to touch this soil. But now you have. And once you hear the truth, you are marked by it. You cannot leave the inn the same as you entered. The fire is dying. The door is open. You can walk away now, but the whisper will follow you. Because the soil remembers. And so do you.